Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriation, and Housing reconvenes its budget hearing from February 21st, 2020, with the Department of Education, fiscal year 2021. Public notice was issued to the media on Friday, May 15, and on Tuesday, May 19. And for the record, today is May 22nd, Friday, and the time now is 1:40. The committee will hear and accept testimonies on Bill 282-35 LS, the fiscal year 2021 Appropriation Act, as requested by the governor, relative to the Guam Department of Education fiscal year 2021 budget. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, Vice Speaker Senator Talina Nelson, who's also the oversight of the Department of Education. I have Senator Amanda Shelton, the Legislature Secretary. I have Senator Lee, the Committee on Rules Chair. I have Senator Kelly Marsh Steidnut, the Assistant Majority Leader. And I have Senator Mary Torres. The conduct of this budget hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying on behalf of the department, who happens to be John Fernandez, and I know that his finance officer should be here shortly. Zenny, written testimony be read. Lengthy written testimony should be summarized to as much time as you need, Mr. Fernandez. This hearing is all in the Department of Education. But keep in mind, this is just the follow-up, okay? We're not going to start from the beginning. I'd like to also recognize that Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes has also joined us today. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony. Mr. Fernandez, if you have anything. Testimony, my colleagues, and Mr. Fernandez will be confined to what this hearing is about. It's about your budget, nothing more. Individuals will present the oral testimony, like yourself, Mr. Fernandez. You will be asked to remain in the room for question and for additional testimony, as may be desired by the members of the committee. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for these proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum may be restricted from providing oral testimony and or may be asked to leave or be escorted, removed from the room. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. And please state your name. At this time, I ask Mr. Fernandez if you can please rise while the Sergeant at Arms will swear you in. Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. Mr. Fernandez, from where we left off in February, there were many questions that was posed to you, sir. And I would ask first to begin, because this is just a continuation. If you could please read the question, and you should know who it came from, and give the answers, and then we'll proceed with any testimony that you may want to provide that will finish off this budget hearing. Sir.
All right, thank you, Senator San Agustin and members of the committee. So I know we're operating in a new environment now, and I appreciate the precautions and the steps taken to ensure that we're still able to conduct our business. But as part of that, I just wanted to notify the committee that I did submit to you yesterday. So hopefully, I don't know if you're able to circulate it, but I did submit via email the document in which I will be reading from today. And basically, I was hoping to come here and be able to summarize each of the questions and answers as we proceed. So if you allow me, I'll go ahead and just read from this as my testimony, and then we can proceed for any other questions and answers that are needed. On January 30, 2020, the Guam Education Board submitted its FY21 budget request for consideration by the Guam legislature. In its submission, the GEB requested $365,019,030 as part of its budget to appropriately fund the needs of the Guam Department of Education, meet the requirements of the Every Child is Entitled to an Adequate Education Act, and meet the obligations to employees under the collective bargaining agreement and other such mandates. So we look forward to your favorable consideration. Following submission of the FY21 budget request, the Committee on Appropriations conducted the first public hearing on our budget on February 21st, 2020. And in my testimony on that date, I took the opportunity to recall the budgetary situation of the department, namely that since 2018, or FY 2018, GDOE's budget had been reduced a total of $19.4 million through the end of FY 2019 as a result of budget cuts and cash shortfalls experienced by the government overall. While the FY 2020 budget was increased over FY 2019, we know that immediately some of those, approximately $2 million of that amount, went directly to the restoration of salary increments, reclassifications, and so forth. So it still required us to carefully monitor the budgetary situation through this year. During the public hearing, DOE was able to present the request and answer questions from the committee. There were also additional questions and responses that were to be followed up, and I'm providing those questions and answers following this. So, number one, there was a request for a description of the facility issues that are still outstanding for the schools, including our major projects. So as you know, in 2013, GDOE was documented with a $90 million estimated deferred maintenance cost, which continues to exist and ranges from all sorts of work, from roof repairs to civic work to plumbing, electrical, and structural issues. Funding for the entirety of these needs has not been readily available, but we work with the available resources that we do have to tackle the priorities. Currently, we are working on the following: canopy replacements at Agustin Johnston, Weddingdale, M.U. Lohan, Price Elementary, and D.O. Perez Elementary School. Electrical repairs at G.W., Talafofo Elementary School, Finnegodzin, Jose Rios Middle School, H.B. Price Elementary School, and Inarajan Middle School. Bell and Intercon system work for all non-leased schools, so that'll be the 35 schools that are not leased. Ponding basin repairs at Untalon Middle School. Drain system improvements, Untalon Middle School, Price Elementary School, Orda Chalampago, and Benavente Middle School. Construction of the retention basin, D.L. Perez and Benavente Middle School. Playground equipment for all schools. Fencing repair at Orda Chalampago. Simon Sanchez High School design phase, which we are currently working on. If I could, I'd like to just introduce my deputy. I know she's a little late, but I think I sent you, Senator San Agustin, some of the mix-up in the time, so please excuse us. I'm glad I was here early, so I just want to say that for the record. Number two, so these are the projects that are currently being worked on, but there still is a host of other deferred maintenance projects that are sort of lined up and not yet able to be funded. And but these are the projects that we are currently working to address with the limited local and federal funds that are available. Number two, where is GDOE at in removing its high-risk grant status by US DOE, which has cost DOE $25 million over the last 10 years? When it is lifted, what is the direction or plan to spend that $2.5 million cost that is put into the budget? So unfortunately, for this, but for this coronavirus pandemic, we were anticipating a visit in April of this year, which would have represented US DOE's hopefully final but official evaluation of our progress, which is documented under the reconsideration evaluation plan that I know we've shared with you in prior hearings. So that plan is a very detailed list of items that we are to complete and show evidence to US DOE regarding that progress for them to virtually monitor and then also to come on site and do their visit. So prior to the government shutdown, which was, I believe, in March 16th of this month, we had just come back from DC, and the discussion was obviously to try to conduct an on-site visit, but then with things rapidly changing, we have shifted to what will likely be a virtual monitoring visit or virtual monitoring exercise that will not take place, well, will take place, but at a later date than originally planned. So right now we are discussing June or July 2020 virtual monitoring by US DOE so they can give us feedback and begin to address our request for reconsideration of the special conditions. So that's the adjustment that we had to make due to the limits on transportation and all the other issues associated with the pandemic. So we will let you know, committee, members of the committee, members of the education committee as well, when that visit is scheduled. And then hopefully after that, we will be able to get, within the next 30 days, a written confirmation of the progress that has been made. And if that progress is sufficient, we expect and we will insist on seeing a revision to the special conditions to reduce the conditions that are imposed upon the department, and hopefully a reduction in the scope of work for the third-party fiduciary agent in place. The plan for those funds, as we've gone over and been reviewing how we would transition, we believe that money can go directly to the schools because we are looking very closely at utilizing our existing internal audit office, our federal programs office, our business office to basically absorb much of the same functions that are currently being done by the third party. What's different from before is that internal audit is now playing a very, very robust role in being that intermediary between the federal government and the agency regarding compliance with federal rules and regulations. And that's something that I believe US DOE has looked favorably upon and represents a way forward without having to create a new office or to create some other function or to hire additional consultants. So that's the strategy with that. So number 3 is what federal funds has GDOE already received in FY 2020, and can any of those funds be used for school facility capital outlays and repairs? Well, GDOE regularly receives federal funding from several sources. That includes from US Department of Education, our consolidated grant funds, which are formula grants that go to every state and territory, and in the amount for Guam of around $30 million every year. That $30 million is shared between DOE public schools as well as our charter schools and our private schools to support education. We also receive funding in the amount of, I believe, between $12 and $13 million for special education. We receive funding from USDA for reimbursement of our school breakfast and lunch program of around $15 to $16 million a year, and also their support for the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program that you see currently in operation to try to get food commodities out into the community. We also receive Head Start funds to support our Head Start program, which is in the amount of around $4 million a year. And then we receive limited funds, but useful funds from the US Department of Interior. What I understand the gist of the question to be was whether or not we were able to take federal funds and use them for many of these facility projects that we always talk about when we come to the legislature. The answer is no, except for a couple of instances. US Department of Interior does allow for infrastructure improvements and facility improvements. And right now we're the beneficiaries of the ABC funds, the ABC program, which provides $1 million a year for up to $5 million to support the findings of the Army Corps report that talked about deferred maintenance in Guam and in other territories. So we do receive those funds, and those are the funds that are covering many of the capital projects that I mentioned before. In addition, Head Start does have limited funds to address Head Start classrooms and as well as playgrounds for the Head Start playgrounds, but those are very focused and limited to those uses. So when it comes to facilities, those are the challenges when it comes to federal funding. Number 4 is based on DOE's latest accounts payable report. DOE's top 20 vendors equated to $20,000, so why can't these be liquidated? So we're very happy that you focused on that because it's one of our concerns as well, especially in this pandemic situation. So Dr. Zenny here, Sunshine, who was our deputy for Finance and Administrative Services, has been focused on every time we get an allotment released and funding from DOA, of course the bulk of that goes to pay payroll and benefits, and then the next portion remaining goes to pay critical contracts that we can't leave unpaid. So the biggest example of that is our utilities. You only get so much time before they start talking about cutting off your power and so forth. So we definitely take care of payroll and then utilities, and then the remainder goes to vendors. So what we're trying to do is take all of the small amounts in payables for the smaller vendors and try to pay those out instead of trying to spread the money around. So take care of our smaller vendors with their smaller amounts of payables. And then with the larger amounts, we're trying to get on payment plans with our bigger vendors like Sodexo and others who can absorb the lag, but do want some commitment to seeing those payables met. So as you know, the challenge with our payables is that right now, I think as of last week, we had about $7 million in accounts payable, and about maybe $4 million of that was over 60 days in terms of the lag. And our difficulty in catching up with the payables has always been the operational dollars associated with TEF and other shortfalls that we've had to deal with in previous years. So every time we have to absorb a shortfall, that tends to fall on our vendors, because we definitely pay the employees first. We don't want to enter into a lawsuit for any of those issues. We definitely want the power and water on, so we pay our utilities, and then what's left we have to use and prioritize to get our vendors paid. So that's the reason why this shortfall issue has come up repeatedly with the legislature. Number 5 was, why was Sodexo among the vendors requiring payment? Aren't the department's free lunches covered with federal funds? So the answer to that is yes. A portion of those meals are covered by USDA's school breakfast and lunch program. Approximately 2/3 of every meal is reimbursed by the federal government, and the remainder is subsidized by our local government. So I believe in our budget request, we had about $16 million that we anticipated would be reimbursed by USDA, but an additional $6 million in subsidy that would be required to support the program. So yes, the answer is there is federal reimbursement. However, there is still a required local subsidy. So for that reason, this summer, as you know, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero committed $1 million to help us sustain the school meals program, the grab-and-go meals program over the summer, because that's the gap that we don't normally account for. But with those extra $1 million, we'll be able to extend and subsidize the school meals program for those 60 days. Number 6 was, based on the 14 points, is DOE failing due to insufficient funding to fulfill those 14 points, and by doing so, perhaps trigger a lawsuit? So, of course, I will never come out in public and try to trigger a lawsuit. So I would just say that we do our best with the funding available to make sure that we address the 14 points, many of which are focused on ensuring that we provide qualified, certified personnel in our classrooms, and then meet the other health and safety needs of our school system. It's very important, and the reason why our budget is so large, because of the 14 points, that we ask for those resources, and we make it clear what we think is necessary to address those resources in total. But recognizing the financial situation of the government, when we get our budget, we then reorient and restructure our budget to be able to tackle those really key issues around health, safety, and school-based needs. So the places where we're most challenged, I would say, is around facilities, number 1, and number 2, around this requirement that there should be a textbook for every child. Those are the 2 issues that I know you're well aware of, but those are the 2 points that we struggle to meet every year. Number 7 was, do we have certified teachers in every classroom? I would say that obviously the answer is we don't. We don't have fully certified teachers in every classroom. We typically have a shortage of teachers going into every school year. We're very happy to see that we get about 150 retirees who are certified, who come back and who are able to work in our classrooms. We do have those who are limited term and may have maybe a temporary certification, they have college degrees and are working towards a full certification, but are still working towards that goal and have not yet met that goal. So it's a constant effort. I think I mentioned that using our federal funds, we have designed a program to work with our limited term teachers and with UOG to get teachers who are interested in full-time certification to support them in being able to take the classes that they need, and more importantly, to pass the praxis, which is a requirement for certification. The praxis costs money to take, and we also, it's also important that we support them in being able to prepare and to pass the praxis. So we're hoping that that'll turn out, between 100 to 200 new teachers who are fully certified for our school system. Number 8 is there sufficient funding for Simon Sanchez High School? Right now we're working on the design phase. And the design phase, it did slow down briefly when we entered this pandemic situation and we were trying to reorient ourselves in terms of how we conduct business. But we did pick up the negotiations, which is what stage we were at, with the highest qualified offerer to try to come to an agreement in order to move forward with the contract formation and award. So we're hoping to complete those negotiations shortly. The funding that's made available right now there was a $500,000 that was made available in the FY20 budget. $1.1 million was committed by the governor through using U.S. Department of Interior funds, and the remainder the Guam Education Board has authorized us to reorganize our FY20 appropriation as needed to fund the difference. And I know that earlier we did have a discussion with the legislature about other sources of revenue, but we also know that we are in a vastly different situation than we were back in February. So we hope to at this point, we want to conclude the negotiations and get to a real price, and then we can have a better sense of how much funding is needed to plug the gap, if any remains. Okay, so once we design, then of course, we would go out and solicit for the construction and financing for the project overall. That funding was set aside in Guam law and the Makahat Act, as I mentioned in our last hearing. The money is set aside, but at this point is not pledged and wouldn't be pledged until we executed a lease. So the only thing I had raised in the last budget hearing was that even though the timeline has moved a couple months, if we are in a position to enter into a lease in the coming fiscal year, then there has to be a reservation of those funds in order to ensure that they're available at the right time. So I know that's going to take a little bit more expertise to make sure of that, but we're happy to work with you and just wanted to bring that to your attention. Number 9 was GDOE's FY21 request included an increase in vacancies and new positions compared to its FY20 request. So 429 vacancies and positions versus 372. Notice, however, there was a decrease in actual warm bodies in your staffing pattern. You're asking for more, but you've hired less. Is it because of funding? So I think the response that we shared earlier, but we will reiterate, is that we do appreciate that the legislature has given us the flexibility to fund what is needed at the department based on the resources available. In many years, sometimes when we see that there are operational shortfalls, we will use and transfer out, and this is an authority granted to the superintendent by this body, to be able to transfer out of personnel to fund those shortfalls in operations. And then, of course, there's a prohibition on moving money the other way, moving money from operations to fund personnel. So we have utilized that flexibility to make up for operational shortfalls where they exist. But in addition, given the cuts that we've seen at the agency, we have tried to slow and frozen, in certain instances, hiring, especially at the central offices. So many of the vacancies that you see in that snapshot in time, which is when the budget was submitted, are mostly at the central offices. Anything that you see at the school sites are really just a point-in-time vacancy, because once that vacancy arrives, we quickly turn around to try to fill the school-based vacancies. However, at the central office, it's a much slower process, really depending on justification and need, and we try to hold off, given the fact that we know our resources are sparse. Number 10, if a principal needs a restroom renovation, what is the process? How does the principal submit the request? Who determines the priority of the work order submitted by the schools? And how would this process differ under site-based management if it were implemented? So the response there was that there are already voluminous number of maintenance requests that principals submit on a daily basis, and they flow through our MUNIS system, which is basically our financial management system, which also allows us to track work orders. Major capital improvement projects, such as restroom renovations, which require much more significant resources and planning and coordination, are turned over to our Capital Improvement Office to address when funding becomes available. Unfortunately, because of the cost of those major projects, and because we don't have, are not able to take advantage of currently of available bond borrowing, those projects are currently have to be paid with money that comes in each year. It makes it harder to finance the bigger projects. So if you have a major project like restroom renovations across the district, it really requires a more dedicated source of funding. Otherwise, you may spend all your resources there and not have resources left for other priorities or other smaller fixes that might be requested. So the capital projects are moved to the Capital Improvement Office. For the rest of them, facilities and maintenance, the facilities division does a lot of the prioritization. I mean, they'll hear from the schools directly to assess what the priorities are, but obviously health and safety are the most important. So anything electrical, anything that's plumbing, anything that would contribute to shutting a school down gets done first. The others, such as carpentry and other things that may not rise to the same level, even though they are important to the schools, may not get the priority. So although there's a lot to be discussed in terms of what site-based management might mean, under such a system, the principal might have more flexibility to change those priorities and to be held accountable for ensuring the health and safety of their schools while managing the funding allotment to cover the services requested. So I can see that that could change the way the resources are allocated if you left it to every principal. The shortcoming would be that they wouldn't be able to pull the necessary funds from elsewhere to address more costly projects that are outside their school budget. So for the major capital improvement projects that usually agencies borrow money through the government to fund over time, those are things that are really sort of the department's responsibility. So there would have to be some sorting out of how to fund the major projects, although the principal would likely have more say as to which maintenance issues get addressed first. Number 11 is, what is the installation status of the donated water stations in various schools? There still are a few, not too many, of these stations that were donated by the Israel Foundation. These are the water stations. They required connection. There were parts for connection, which is why we were waiting to install them. And unfortunately, we went into shutdown, so those haven't been installed yet, but we'll be working to install them by the start of the school year. Number 12 is, what percentage of DOE's requests and personnel are for vacant positions versus new positions? So of the 3,361 FTEs being requested, 75% are filled and about 12% are vacant, and then the 12%, about 11.6% are new positions. So that's the answer to the breakdown between vacant and new positions. Number 13 is, under point 13, 180 instructional days, what divisions comprise the 142 positions in point 13? So those positions are found basically in the administrative offices. Those include the Guam Education Board, Superintendent's Office, Research Planning and Evaluation, FSAIS, which is our technology office, Curriculum and Instruction, including our Learning Resource Center, Chamorro Studies, Financial Affairs, Human Resources, Supply Management, Education Support and Community Learning, Special Education, Internal Audit, and Receiving and Property Management. So those are what I consider to be the administrative overhead costs for the department, which comes to about 6.6% of the total budget request. The last question was, what is the percentage of staff set to retire? We had intended to conduct a survey of employees, but that's not yet completed due to the shortened school year. However, I believe there are about, as a proxy, there are about 400 employees with 25 or more years of service currently on the department's payroll. So you can see over the next 5 years, you can get an estimate of the number of employees who might be considering retirement. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to answer the questions from the February 20 public hearing and to provide these additional responses as well. I do know that the staff, in coming up with these questions, went back to the tapes to try to get every single question they could from the hearing. I apologize if we've missed any, but we're here to answer any outstanding questions about the FY21 budget. Chido Esmalasi, thank you, Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Let me see. Wow, that was a good number of questions you had to answer. John, your oversight chair has had numerous information hearings. So for my committee, and I've attended most of them, there's a lot of information there, and I asked my colleagues, please read up on the report that comes from the oversight chair, and so we don't have to keep asking the same questions over and over and over. All right? That's number one. Number two, please rest assured that being familiar with the Department of Education's needs and the whisper that I get often from your oversight chair to make sure we try to give you a little bit more, I'm hearing it and I'm listening to it, okay? In 2019, you received $230 million. Last year, this year, you received 219. Our goal in the committee is to figure out a way how we can get as close to what you got in 2019, okay? So help us out, streamline whatever you need to do in the Department of Education so we can help you pay off your vendors, take care of our children out there, and move forward. Because that's one task that's on your shoulders. And please extend a thank you to your chair of the Board of Education, Ms. Gutierrez, because her and I go back a while back, and she's a fighter. That I admire of her.
I'm sure she's watching, sir.
Oh yes, and I hope her the best. And I'm in communication with her often, and you know it's all about the students, the children of Guam. It doesn't matter. My concern is I've been hearing is that your principals have been getting calls from a lot of parents that will be taking their children out of private schools and maybe registering to DOE. I'm going to safely state, I know you're ready for it. Please be ready, because this COVID has caused a crisis on all the private schools. Money is scarce, and DOE is the way to go. Okay, so just be prepared. Senator Vice Speaker, let me make sure I recognize whichever senator showed up here. I have Senator Will Castro joined us, and Senator Jim Whalen, and Senator Luis Muña. Thank you for joining us. Vice Speaker, Senator Talina Nelson, Oversight, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the Office of Finance and Budget for all of their hard work, and also for collaborating and assisting us with Guam Department of Education's enormous budget, and to really find a medium where we can meet halfway to ensure that we still try our very best to meet the 14 points and to also provide for the children and their needs. I'd like to thank also the Guam Department of Education, the team out there that has been working diligently to provide extended learning services for them outside of the school classroom. I know that they are working tirelessly, all the teachers and staff, and also those that have been providing meals for our island's children, not just those that attend Guam Department of Education, but all of our island's children. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, for that tremendous amount of work that you did, for that excellent job. I know it wasn't easy, and I know you worked your butt off for that. So, which is why I didn't bother you so much during this time, because I know that you guys were working very hard. So thank you, and thank you to the Guam Department of Education team for spearheading that. I have several questions here, because, you know, GDOE always comes with a big ask for an appropriation, and this year their ask is about $365 million. And of course we cannot meet that, that quota, but there are areas of federal funding sources that kind of fill in some of these gaps, which is your consolidated grants, and sometimes you get 60 million, sometimes you get 70 million, or in or around that number. And so it brings the the educational achievements up for our students when you start to implement the consolidated grants, because Guam just can't afford that big ask. So what is the current tracking of your TEF? I'm very concerned about your TEF. A big portion of your budget was appropriated for that last year. And so can you just let us know what is your TEF tracking, and if you heard anything from BBMR about projections and impacts to the TEF because of this COVID-19 impacts?
Well, thank you, Vice Speaker, and again, thank you for the kind words, which I know are aimed at the team that's out there. I mean, really the people who are out manning the food distribution sites, and also our teachers and our staff who participate in distance learning. So we have a wonderful team, and I think it's in times like this where you see them really step up and take some of these risks, some of them personal risks, to go out and serve the community. So we're really, I'm very pleased, as you are, to see how many people just kind of stepped up in the midst of all these fears and anxieties to do what we can to serve the community. So I hope that they hear your words as well. Now, with regard to the budget, I'll say that right now we are almost 3/4 through the fiscal year, and we're tracking pretty well with our release of our general fund allotments, and surprisingly with TEF. So early on, I think back in February, we were very concerned, because February, that's the time when we're going to start to see collections, and we were wanting to understand whether they will come in as projected or not. So I'll be honest, I'm not aware and not tracking the projections. We've been tracking the release of funds for the department to ensure that we have resources. So as of today, I will say that we are on target for the timely release of our general fund allotments, and I believe about 80% of the TEF funds have been released to date. So if we hear anything different, of course, we'll let the front office know as well as you, but right now we're happy that at least those resources are coming through.
That's very good to hear. I suppose I should give my thanks to BBMR and GDOE for their hard work to ensure that you're getting those allotments. So I'd like to thank them at this time and acknowledge the work that they're doing to support the Guam Department of Education. Item number 2, we discussed this yesterday, so just real quick, not everyone was there. You received from the U.S. Department of Education $41.5 million for the CARES Act. Can you just give us the exact number today? What would be GDOE's portion of this $41.5 million?
So $41.5 million is committed but not yet drawn down for the island. We hope to have that done by next week. So right now we are in the process of completing the application based on the input that we've received from our stakeholders. Today we are expecting our parent-teacher organizations to provide any updated input that they might have to us as a result of our requests. But we've met with representatives of the students as well. We've met, of course, with teacher leaders, administrators, division heads, and also the non-public schools, so the charter schools and the private schools who do benefit from this. So I don't have a precise figure except to say that it was around $31 to $32 million. So basically the 41.5 would be allocated based on enrollment. And based on enrollment, we're about $32 million of the funding would come to DOE Public Schools. And then the rest would go to the 2 charters, as well as to the private schools like the Catholic schools, St. John's, Harvest, St. Paul's, and so forth, all those who elect to participate. So this isn't a matter of dividing the budget and sharing the dollars directly. It really is about applying to the U.S. Department of Education to let them know what activities we're going to fund with those dollars, and then all entities, public and private, are able to participate in those activities. So if we are going to use it for distance learning, then based on the needs of the traditional public schools, the charters, and the private schools, we'll be able to move forward to procure laptops, procure professional development, to improve internet access. And if that's an approved activity, that's an activity in which all public and private entities can share in. Similarly with mental health supports, similarly with the safety equipment, which is really a high priority for us, the personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies. All of those things can be benefited from and shared amongst all the participating private and public schools.
Okay. So yes, the reason why I'm asking is because, you know, we see the impacts of COVID-19, and now we have this social distancing that will probably be seeing practiced within our everyday lives for like the next year or two. And so GDOE always comes to the table saying they need money for textbooks, and every year we appropriate 1.5 million for the textbooks, and then you're not able to utilize that money because you're using it for operations. And so, you know, it's just a concern. Perhaps we can, if it's possible for your team to really look at certain avenues so we can start cutting down the,
Yes.
you know, so we can maybe join the requirements with the textbooks, and if we're able to use this money to boost up the technology resources and provide island-wide internet for the students, primarily the students, to do their schoolwork, so that the textbooks won't be such a huge cost on the issue and you just purchase licensing every year.
Correct.
And so I'm sure that this is an avenue that the Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Joe Sanchez, is doing. And so if we can just ensure that, you know, we meet this gap somewhere, because I hate to see it where our students are still learning from textbooks from 5 to 10 years ago, and it's just not acceptable. But it's kind of the what we can afford at this time, right? And what services that GDOE can provide. So if we can utilize this crisis as an opportunity to evolve and to allow our students to be a little bit more up to date by providing them with these kinds of resources, you know, we'd like to see some forward progress on that.
Okay. So I think this is, I mean, I would call this situation a crisis, but I would also state that as you know, and as people say, that in every crisis we look for those opportunities
Right.
to improve, not just to address the crisis, but then if there's an opportunity to strengthen ourselves and be more resilient going
Yes.
forward, then we ought to do so. So the way I've looked at these federal funds is exactly in that same light. First of all, and you know, for the consolidated grant funds that we have, which is around $30 million each year, we keep in mind that we shut the school system down in March. So there were funds that were there and associated with things like the Pacific Educator Conference, which we were supposed to hold, the other trainings that we were supposed to hold, and other activities that were supposed to take place that we didn't need to fund. So some of those funds are now going to be able to be carried over under the rules of the consolidated grant. So we have a pending application for those monies to be able to use those, again, within the approved constraints or parameters of the federal government. This 41.5 is on top of that. So I think my caution is that the guidance from the federal government is this. Number one, it's not like the consolidated grant in which supplement versus supplant, that rule that applies to USDOE funds, it does not apply in this case. So that means where the local government, you know, for instance, we have a textbook mandate that mandate is the local governments to fulfill. The federal government will not step in to then provide funding for that. It's called, we'll supplement it, but we won't supplant what are already mandated responsibilities of the local government. So that definitely has been a constraint. With these funds, though, there still is a maintenance of effort, and I think this is something for the committee to consider. The maintenance of effort, and I'm happy to provide that language, requires the government to at least provide the support on average over the last fiscal years for the school system. So there is going to be education funding that needs to be provided from the local government, but there isn't a supplement versus supplant rule. So that will allow us for this coming year to start doing things that we might not have been able to do prior under the consolidated grant. So for instance, whether or not we'll be able to buy textbooks is still something that we would have to get approval for, but there is, under the distance learning plan, there is going to be room, obviously needed, for hard copy materials including workbooks and other supplementary materials, if not textbooks, to support our students. We know that some students are going to have access to the internet, some won't. We're not going to be able to solve that problem by August. So we definitely know that hard copy materials in some form or fashion are going to be part of that strategy. And so we're open and we're talking about using those funds. So when we talk about distance learning, it isn't just about the internet and isn't just about laptops. It's about how do we allow students at home to continue learning, and the hard copy materials are definitely a part of it. So I would say that there are things like that, similar to that, that are in our budget. I mean, the consolidated grant has gone a long way to supporting teaching and learning because our budget typically pays for the personnel, the operational costs, and your utilities, and then some facility work, and then the remainder we're funding from consolidated grant. So going forward, we have a little bit more flexibility, and that's in the distance learning initiative. That's where that discussion will come up. So we will consider and try to figure out what the feds will allow us to do. I think the other things we talked about is PPE. So that's definitely a focus. Those where it might have been a requirement for us to purchase cleaning supplies and cleaning equipment, they're now allowing us to be able to make that a focus, knowing that safety is a big issue. So we'll keep you abreast. We're planning to finalize and submit that application early next week, and then once we get the final word, we will share that out publicly so everybody understands where these funds will be going.
Okay. And yes, it is understood that this money, this 41.5 or the 31 million portion thereabouts will be going to GDOE, but it is a one-time fund. It's not something that GDOE is going to continue. So however it's spent, we need to make sure that we can carry it on with the rest of our budget for the years to come. And so I just want to make sure the appropriation chair knows that.
Right, absolutely. We're not funding something that will have a second year and third year requirement. We want something that we can buy once that lasts beyond the next 2 or 3 years. So that's definitely a part of our planning.
Thank you. And then the certified teachers in the classroom, I know because with the COVID-19 impacts, you're trying to redesign and also prepare for any additional curveballs that we get that we'll have to adjust the interactions with the students in the school.
Right.
And so there's always a lack for certified teachers, but now that University of Guam is graduating more students, I believe that there are graduates that do not necessarily have an education degree, but have a degree in some other field, but are looking forward to perhaps seeing if they can get a job at GDOE for an emergency certification. So is there any anticipation or any plan in place for a job fair or to be able to provide more jobs for the new students graduating from University of Guam?
So right now, what makes me feel comfortable is that I've got a whole team watching this and adding to our list of to-dos. So I know you asked me this question before, and I let you know that it was canceled, and we just weren't able. We didn't have immediate plans to figure out how to start a job fair up under these conditions. But based on your comments and suggestions, we did put it on our preparation list to be able to ensure that we're reaching out to those who are interested in working for the department. So we'll have more information as to how that'll take place. Obviously, it'll have to be a different way of gathering people and their interests together than we did before. But thank you for that. I think the other concern, just to put it on the record, this recovery effort is going to be an immense challenge for everybody across the country, the world, and we're really paying attention to those who are opening early. But one of the concerns that's recently come up, of course, is that may make it challenging for teachers in the classroom, is that obviously there are going to be teachers who may be in high-risk categories or who feel apprehensive about coming to the classroom. And that's definitely something we care about because safety is going to be the guiding light in how we plan. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We are going to be working with our teachers and the union to kind of work through what to do in those situations, what are appropriate accommodations, and how do we ensure the teaching and learning is going on. So again, even as UOG is producing graduates, we may have more people than usual who say, I'm not ready to come back physically into the classroom, and we're going to have to deal with that because there's still going to be a lot of fear and anxiety, rightfully so, from those who may see themselves or maybe, may be in those high-risk categories.
Okay. And then, Mr. Superintendent, the Simon Sanchez High School, it says in question number 8, you mentioned this includes the governor's contribution of $1.1 million from USDOI, and additional $500,000 is authorized in GDOE's FY budget. But from what I remember, or what I recall, is that there was an additional $1.5 million dropped into DOE. What happened, which was supposed to be an agreement to utilize it for Simon Sanchez, but I don't see it being accounted for here.
Okay, I would have to follow up. I'm not sure if if that was the amount that we had previously in terms of expiring funds that we had to shift to operations because we weren't able to move forward with the procurement during that fiscal year. I'd have to go and reconfirm that, but that was a significant amount of money that we didn't have. We weren't able to close the gap with the remainder at that time. So earlier this year, we had that discussion. I think the legislature was working to determine whether excess revenues would be available to fill the remaining gap. But that's, I'm happy to confirm those numbers for you.
Right, so I understand that
Right.
it was actually dropped into DOE's account, and there was an agreement. So it wasn't in the law or anything that that $1.5 million would be used for Simon Sanchez. So maybe we can.
I'd have to go reconfirm that, and so I'll have Dr. Zenny, and we'll provide those numbers to you,
Okay.
and I'll give you an accounting of where those monies went.
All right, thank you. Because I'm still bothering the OFB chair about the bills that we wrote to complete the requirement for your request for the Simon Sanchez High School.
So
And
what I
so-
can do is, we're getting, again, with the negotiation happening, we're hopeful to be able to get to a point where we can get a better understanding of the number that we're going to be dealing with, since we're close, and then at that time be able to come back and let you know what that gap is. So, and of course, the board has authorized me to use our appropriation as we can to supplement the monies that are currently set aside.
Okay, and so if there's a way, because every year we come to the budget request and GDOE gives us reasons why they need the money, but if we could also be transparent in these measures, that would be good.
Okay.
Because of the COVID-19 impacts, the schools were closed early, and you had to address the grading scheme, and also the credits that you were giving for our high schools and middle schools and our elementary school students. But every year, GDOE spends about $11 million to $13 million on utilities. So when we closed the schools, how did that impact the cost of your utilities?
We're still gathering that information, but we expect to see it lower, and especially over the summer, because we're not going to be able to run summer school either. So that's exactly where we're looking for potential savings in the event that we may need money for Simon Sanchez or other funding. So yes, definitely monitoring that as part of this strange fiscal year where we shut down, before the end of the school year.
Okay.
So that's something that we're going to track, and again, if funds are available and not needed for utilities, then we'll be able to hopefully deal with any other shortfall that may arise.
Thank you. Last year, we were also discussing redistricting and reorganizing some of the schools and repurposing some of the schools. Are we making any movement on this? Because there was a bill that was put out to try to give Guam Department of Education an appropriation to do just that. But we're hoping also for a cost-saving measure. Is there any, can you at least give us a brief on where you're at with Jose Rios and Chief Brody Memorial School?
Right. I'll have to say, back in February and January, when we had some of this more recent discussion, we were also discussing finalizing the redistricting plan that we had already introduced a couple years ago that would have redistricted the middle schools and high schools, and we've held that off, not just because it was getting late in the school year, but definitely because we shut down the school year and weren't able to really get any information out to parents and students. So there will be no redistricting taking place for the coming school year. And that means that we'll continue to work on the possibilities for Rios and Chief Brody, but I'm going to leave it to the board. They're not here, but they were the ones who wanted to help work with you to prioritize Chief Brody as a potential middle school and to find that funding. So it is in the budget as a request, but no further, as from our last discussion, no further work has really been done as we've been focused now on trying to close out the school year.
Okay, so perhaps that might be a good thing because I don't know if there will be money for FY 2021 to provide for that appropriation. So, we just want to make sure that we're in constant communication so that we know the needs of Guam Department of Education. The 885,000 that we...
If I could put something on the record just for
Sure.
your consideration as well, and maybe looking ahead, even though I don't believe there's anything final and I can't predict the future, we are keeping our eye on the HEROES Act that is in Congress.
Right.
And this is a bill introduced in the House, passed in the House, now before this,
Yes.
or I believe it requires Senate and approval as well, but,
Yes.
and I know there's opposition in the Senate, but that's a bill that we're tracking because of the fact that it is aimed directly, unlike the CARES Act, it's aimed directly at offsetting the loss in revenue for state and local governments, and there is a set aside for education. So one of the hopes is that if there is an influx of funding, again, that those might be flexible enough to be used for some of these outstanding projects. So just something that we're keeping in mind, knowing that we're going to have to deal with our revenue situation. But if there's an opportunity in the future because of additional relief, then I'm sure we'll bring that up again as part of our efforts to keep the investments in education going.
Okay, thank you. Last year, we appropriated $885,000 for GDOE's capital improvement projects, and really the intent of this was to do some hoping that DOE would use it for renovations of the restrooms and install water fountains and just to improve the quality of life within the school for the student, and perhaps even repair extreme water leaks. We know that some of our schools lose thousands and thousands of dollars due to water leaks. And so where are we tracking for what this $885,000 was used for? Also, Mr. Superintendent, last year we visited as many schools as we could before COVID broke out, and a lot of the schools, most especially the secondary middle schools, were lacking canopies, and I understand you had some grant money to fulfill some of the needs for the canopies of the schools, but there are also other schools that needed canopies, which was why I asked my colleagues to support this measure, was the need for also the canopies for the students. And so can you just tell us where we're at? I know that there are teachers and the staff that are still concerned about this, and most importantly, the parents, the stakeholders, about the canopy issue.
Okay, if that's something we could follow up on, I do have a list of all of the capital projects that we're working from, which are either ongoing, proposed, or completed. And if we could just take that and provide that to the committee for your review, that'll give you a sense of where the money is going and where the federal and local money is being spent. So there's a whole range of issues, and as I indicated before, some of these canopy projects are going to be at the very least $250,000 to $300,000 a pop. So we have been lucky to have some of the federal money going into that. But if we could provide you a listing of the completed projects, then that might be a better way to give you that information, so you have the specifics.
Yes,
I have it here before me, but it's it's a long list.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to discuss, I know our current enrollment has changed over the years, and the OFB chair now is getting calls and saying that there are some parents of private schools that are looking to transfer their students into Guam Department of Education. So please consider that, and also the perhaps if not all the classrooms are being utilized, we have every year Guam taxpayers pay enormous amounts for the T's and lease. And so, and also the central operations building. So I know a lot of people are going to get upset when I say this, but perhaps we can look at a way to repurpose that and move central operations back into the schools, and we can utilize that for a revenue source, because I'm really worried, I'm concerned about the impacts of our revenue because of this COVID-19 crisis, and a lot of people are unemployed, and so we're not going to see the same type of revenue that we saw in the previous years. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the hard work and support that the OFB did. I really appreciate your assistance and your team's help.
Thank you, Madam Vice. John, I think we had mentioned before, I think we're supposed to be working on some, I don't know if you're going to be working with your oversight about, I think the PD property, to find a way where you can get the authorization by law so you can lease it out and you can generate some money. So I think we're going to work on that. And for all the other issues that I know the Vice Speaker was asking me, I'll blame it on COVID, okay? That's why the bills never went, okay, for now. And we'll work it from there. I would only ask Mr. Superintendent Johns that as you work the $41 million, make sure you know your federal programs people at DOE, keep them out of the picture. You guys figure it out, because that's separate federal money. They're bright folks, don't get me wrong, but sometimes when the minds get mixed up together, they forget what the 41 is for and what their consolidated grants are for. And you gotta keep it separate so that you can do what you need to do and get it done and continue to keep asking for more funds out of the grants. I'd like to also recognize Minority Leader Senator Tello. I saw her all morning. I forgot that she's still up here in front of me. Thank you for joining us, Senator Tello. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions? And then after you, will be followed by the Legislative Secretary, Senator Amanda Shelton. Ma'am?
Cecil Mossy, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I know that the good Oversight Chair asked some really good questions, and I just want to share with you as we anticipate, Mr. Fernandez, our anticipated budget shortfalls for 2021, we will understandably prioritize GDOE, and I had several questions. Several of them were answered, but I did want to ask one simple one, but it's probably not an easy one. Have we begun talks with something that's always been near to me, charter schools? I know, when we talk about students, it's not just about public schools or charter schools, it's Guam students, and I know there's a lot of talks about even private schools getting into the public school system now. Have we started that discussion on charter schools and how we're going to facilitate that?
So I'm not sure specifically what you mean. I do know that our charter schools and are involved because they are federally funded as well. So we do maintain communication with them to ensure that they are able to participate in the funds that are made available through USDOE. So we did have a recent meeting with them about maybe a week or two ago to discuss their priorities. Beyond that, it's been a different kind of year because it was the first year when we were separated from the review process. And of course, as you know, we have so much on our plate that we turn our attention immediately to others. So it's really mostly through the federal funding supports that we keep in touch and ensure that we're providing them the services that they need. But beyond that, I'm not sure if there's something else I'm missing. But beyond that, it's only on an as-needed basis where we, if there's something they need, then they'll contact us and let us know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez. Yes, and I do know that this was the first year of the separation, but I know with the grants, some of the grants coming in, and your mention of them earlier, I wanted to make sure that conversation of the charter schools and bringing to the forefront that that
Right.
there are a lot of students in the 3 charter schools that are there. And even, if I'm not mistaken, based on, I guess, a year and a half ago, that there was another one that was included, or the preliminary steps, so.
So I'll be honest, that I'm not sure recently, maybe the last contact I had was with iLearn, just to get a better understanding of their transition into distance learning. And I know SIFA and Guahan, I know I saw their information about closing their school year, and then I understand SIFA is continuing to do some distance learning as well. But there hasn't really been as much coordination as you might be implying. We really are working to ensure they are able to get relief from the federal funds, because we know that that's a shared priority across the board. I don't know, as nonprofits, if they're eligible for the PPP program to continue to support payroll assistance, but that might be another area during this pandemic time that they might be looking for, opportunities for assistance.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you,
Mr.
Speaker.
Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Amanda?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Sejus Masi, Mr. Superintendent, and thank you also, Dr. Zenni, for being here today. If I can just follow up on one of the comments that you made about the CARES Act funding and it being shared with the public or with the private and charter schools. Once you figure out whatever program you're going to be using it for, would that then become an application process that our charter schools and private schools come to you for, or will it automatically be dispersed?
It's actually mirrors what we already do with consolidated grants. So what's required is a timely and meaningful consultation. That's actually a federal requirement, that there be timely and meaningful consultation with our private nonprofit partners. That means that we share with them the information about the funds. We discuss the allowable uses and the parameters and so forth, and then we seek their input as to what they would prefer and like to see the funds be spent on. There are certain things that where we have a lot of common ground, during the pandemic, which is good to see. So again, those 3 areas of distance learning, the safety issues, the personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies for the facilities, as well as mental health supports. There's a lot of commonalities, so that I believe will help drive the application process. And then beyond that is really a short application, not really an application, but really an information as to what the use will be for those schools who want to participate. And once that's reviewed for allowable use, then and it's both and we do that in DOE as well. So it's not just the private schools. We also have to ensure that we've got documented the specific use of those funds so that we can account for it at the tail end. Even though there's flexibility, we still want to make sure that when they come at the end of this period and ask all these detailed questions, that we have the documentation to keep us in line with their requirements.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good to know that there is already an understanding of these other schools of what the process is like. We won't have to reinvent the wheel when the time comes. And so I assume you'll be giving them the notification when all of that is approved. That's good. I'd also like to ask about whether or not we have some contingency plans when it comes to the budget for the event that there is a second wave, God forbid, and we don't open schools in the fall. Are we already looking at how we are going to rearrange the budget to fit the needs if that point ever comes?
That's a very good question, and I think that's a task that we'll all share. I think the issue for us is this is going to be a very abnormal year. So looking at the costs, right now we're not even at that stage of looking at costs. We're looking at first of all, what it will take to reach a minimum requirement for safety to be able to open any facility. So we know that we're subject to the P-Core framework that the governor has put in place, but once she declares P-Core 3, it's been clarified, that's not an automatic opening of every facility in every school. It just gives us the authority back to determine how to open up and on what schedule. So the planning right now is we're targeting August 11th as the first day of school, which is our regular schedule. We're just targeting it so that we can move aggressively towards that date and ensure that we take any action needed to make sure we have things in place. And we're going to work to expedite the procurement of all of our safety supplies and equipment that we know we need in order to open up. And then the assumption is that we'll be at PCOR 3 by then. So if we don't hit PCOR 3 and we don't have all the PPEs in place, because we know that supply is kind of been an issue that's commonly faced here and the rest of the country, that'll be the trigger for the Plan B. So we're still discussions right now have factored in staggered schedules. So we still anticipate having teachers at school. We still anticipate having students at school, but under a different type of schedule to maintain social distancing and all the other safety parameters. We want to combine that with distance learning, but distance learning at this point we're hoping to fully fund as much as possible through our federal dollars, and so hopefully it won't have an impact, a disruptive impact based on the budget, and based on what the legislature approves. But again, I get your point. Is in the end is can we foresee a budgetary impact from a second wave and a potential second shutdown of government and of the schools? So, like I said, I have the whole team listening to the hearing, so I'm sure they're writing this down to make sure that we can have a good response when it comes time to finalize our recovery plan.
Yeah, okay.
And by the way, this is something that is in process, but beginning, I believe, next week and beyond, we will have more public discussions with regard to the recovery, the task force progress, and all of the details into what we're considering and planning and doing, so that you'll understand, and maybe that'll give us more insight into whether there are budgetary implications.
Okay, thank you very much. And in that same vein of preparing if there's a second wave, one of the comments you made in the hearing the other day was about the possibility that our school nurses may be recruited to work for the public health system in the event that they're needed. And so now I'm a little bit anxious about whether or not we're going to lose those nurses going into the next school year, and what kind of plan we have for that.
So to clarify that point, just to make sure that I was clear, is that our school nurses are employed for the duration of the school year. And after the school year ends, they are no longer required to report for duty until the next school year. So with that in place, and that is actually a matter set forth in a collective bargaining agreement as well, as far as their duties and responsibilities as school nurses. So with that in place, when the executive order went into place to declare a public emergency, and the governor directed the use of nurses to assist in the front lines, those nurses were then deployed to public health, and public health then took charge of assignments and so forth. We did have some confusion regarding how we would compensate these nurses because of the fact that we weren't sure whether this would be reimbursed or some other agency would take place. So we since have clarified that, and DOE has fronted the money and will seek reimbursement for their costs and for their differential pay as we accrue those expenditures. Now, at the end of the school year, they are no longer required by the Department of Education to report for duty. They fulfilled their responsibilities to the school system, and the instruction to them and the agreement with the administration is that if public health is going to want them to work, they will have to negotiate their employment for the summer, and therefore they would have to fill out an application and be directly employed for that temporary period of time prior to the start of the school year. So the challenge once we get past the summer is really going to be how does the government as a whole maintain nurses on call in a sense in a situation where they are working in our schools and expected to work and support our schools, and then all of a sudden there may be a need for them elsewhere. That's something we haven't quite worked through. It's something we've identified. I think the Lieutenant Governor and I talked about the fact that that would be the next challenge. What happens during the school year if all of a sudden the governor sees a need for nurses to report to the airport or public health or so forth? That will present a lot of difficulty for us because those nurses do take care of our kids at school and are going to be a key to managing the health situation in our schools this coming year for sure. Not only for our kids, but our employees and staff, just kind of keeping an eye, monitoring, helping us address and respond to anything that might approach a health situation as usual, but even more pronounced in this pandemic situation. So that's something that's not yet worked through, but we'll continue to work with the nurses and with the administration to figure out whether there is an arrangement that can be made to the satisfaction of all parties.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that it's at least on the radar when it comes to the competing needs throughout the entire community. We just want to make sure that our students will still be taken care of. So thank you very much. And this will be my final question for you, Mr. Superintendent, just about graduation ceremonies for this school year. I understand that we put a little bit aside for each graduation ceremony to finance those ceremonies. And so since we won't be having these traditional ceremonies this year, how are we going to see those funds spent? And are we planning any kind of graduation ceremonies for this year's seniors?
Yes, so I'll double check. I'm not sure we released it or not, but we were getting the final details together from the schools regarding their graduation ceremonies. So they are planning what we would call alternate graduation ceremonies. So it no longer will be in the UOG Fieldhouse as planned, but every school, the 6 high schools and JP Torres Success Academy, will have their own ceremony on campus through a drive-through, probably a combination of drive-through plus a virtual component where there is a video stream or a live stream or some sort of videos where people can watch and participate from afar. So those details, the dates and times will be announced. I guess we might not have put it out yet because we're trying to finalize those plans. But the funds that were set aside will be going to support those ceremonies, and then any remainder will have to be determined within the parameters of our non-appropriated funds policies. Most of these funds actually are fundraised. So the majority of these funds are fundraised. So as long as our auditor has been involved in providing guidance to the schools with regard to the potential use of those funds. So I think once they settle out what's needed to support their drive-through graduations, then that remainder they will have to determine how they will be used, or else it will roll back to the school funds for the coming year. So I think students have asked whether they can donate those funds to a good cause or a good organization, whether they can use those funds for mementos for the graduates in lieu of having a separate ceremony, whether they can donate it to the following graduating class. And so all of those are within the parameters, but it'll take some steps for them to finalize those plans.
Sure. Thank you very much for that answer. It's really unfortunate that our students, our graduates, are being robbed of this, the pomp and circumstance this year, but I am very happy to hear that the department will be doing something special for each and every one of them, and that they will get to decide how those funds are being used after their ceremony, if there's anything left over. So we look forward to the schedule and celebrating virtually with all our graduates. And Mr. Superintendent, I too would like to thank you and all of your staff and all of the volunteers who have continued to work throughout this pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Amanda. Senator Will Castro, do you have any questions, sir?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Superintendent, I heard you address the body earlier about maybe some long-standing issues we've had with DOE insofar as teacher vacancies are concerned. I've experienced that as well. Historically, on average, how many teachers over the course of a summer you say would kind of fall out? I know you identified 150 retirees that would come back historically. That's kind of around the ballpark. So would that be around 350, you think? Just thinking out loud.
That fall out?
Yeah, on average, every year, we're looking for what, about 250, 350 teachers at the start of the school
we typically maintain, we typically maintain about, like I'd say 150 to 200 vacancies that are typically filled by retirees who come back. What we see is every graduation, so you might see this, in the winter and then the spring, you might see about 20, 25 graduates who come out, and a portion of them will be recruited to come join DOE, but that's still not enough to match the number of people who leave, which I would categorize, I have to go back, I wouldn't, but I would say it's less than 100, but still much more than the 40 we might get from UOG. So it's a constant kind of chasing the vacancy game.
And I appreciate that. It was important for me, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair of the committee, to ask, given the circumstances with this pandemic, Somebody alluded to it earlier that private schools will I actually know of 2 private schools whose enrollment will be falling at this point in time based on early registration stats that are coming in. Do you anticipate maybe less interest by faculty to come back to DOE if we had to go into maybe a hybrid distance learning type environment? And if you do, are there any mitigating plans to address that?
So that's a very good question and right on. I mean, it's right on the point that the committee, our task force is looking at and preparing for. So I think I alluded to earlier is that in addition to the normal vacancy situation that we would typically see, now you're in an environment where teachers may not be interested in going back to the classroom, at least not early this year, or at least not until the situation works itself out. So, I was mentioning that in the context of current fully certified full employees, who are in the system and having to work through that. But you're mentioning retirees who don't necessarily have to come back. It's their option. So I don't have any more information than you do about the numbers who will or will not come back. Over the course of the summer, as part of our school readiness, we do a monitoring of the recruitment to fill these positions. And it'll probably be later in early July or so where we'll see whether the hiring is on pace to fill those positions as we would compared to last year. So Vice Speaker Nelson mentioned the fact that we didn't have our job fair. That is a complication for us because usually it's at our job fair where we start to fill some of those immediate positions early. But without the job fair, we're going to have to rely on other recruitment and hiring efforts to fill those positions. So, like I said, I think that's something that our team's listening to. We don't know, but we're worried about the fact that you're right. Some people might not feel comfortable, at least in August, right, when we're saying that we might want to start school. August, September, October, they might not feel comfortable until they get past this time period where people are talking about a second surge and then maybe opt to come in. We were also, and as you know, we were keeping an eye on the challenges as well for our colleagues in the CNMI who are also going through a difficult time. So, we know that teachers may not want to work, retirees who are fearful may not opt to come back. We were also hearing some interest in if the situation didn't get better, would we be willing to work with our CNMI colleagues who want to come and teach on Guam, and of course, we'll be open to them. I know that they're in a dire situation there, and if they do show up at our doors, we will, of course, treat them like any other applicant and welcome them into our classrooms. But that's the situation we're all trying to monitor during this strange time.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And, as background information, I'm sure you're aware that throughout the country, brick and mortar institutions, particularly colleges and universities, may not even fully recover. And I share that with you because I anticipate that if there's a second wave and if we have to go into some kind of distance learning or hybrid learning environment, and our teachers are not equipped to get a hold of the technology and the families are not equipped to receive the type of instruction, the quality instruction that they need, my concern is less about the technology and the more and more we fall back as a community in the need to meet these educational goals we set for ourselves and to prepare our students. I can tell you firsthand, and I'm sure the good chair and others in here who have children or others who are attending school online, that it is night and day between, even within an institution, one that you may consider to be a more affluent institution, if you will, or resource-rich, or at least have these technology tools. Even with that institution, not every teacher is able to continue to deliver a high-quality education or even some semblance of education. I have a daughter in one private school, and I have a son in another private school now, and I could tell you that based on my experience with my partner who teaches at a public institution, that it's night and day, and so I'm concerned. I want to lend my support. I want to encourage my colleagues to work closely with you. I've reached out to the good chairperson as a fellow educator that I'd like to be involved in those discussions, Mr. Fernandez, to put us back on our feet and be prepared for the worst. Certainly we can expect the best, but it's going to be an uphill challenge. I know that the schools are equipped. I think a year ago, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, the report from GDOE came out that we had 99% connectivity or penetration of some kind of connectivity into every school. But when you go out into these geographically disparate areas, these areas that don't have that kind of connectivity, and we're in this COVID situation, I fear, and I'm really sad about the situation, because now they become part of the disenfranchised, right? Those who are disconnected. And so that's my greatest concern, Mr. Chairman. Maybe at another time, consistent with my line of questioning in the past, I usually reserve my more detailed questions to submit to the chair or via writing directly to you, Mr. Superintendent. But one I will ask for, I know I've asked for the fiscal facilities master plan, but this is not as high of a priority as what you had mentioned specifically, which was a distance education master plan. Am I correct that the department has a distance ed master plan?
It's part of, well, I wouldn't say it's complete, but it's something that we have designed to get us through the end of the year and the summer, and will be further modified to basically map out how we plan to move through the short, mid, and long term. So yes, that's part of our recovery effort. Safety number one, distance learning number two, and everything else to fall in place. So definitely we can do that. We can provide that, and happy to. Like I said, if this were just a normal year, and we come to you and we know that we know the drill. We come to you with a big request. We know the challenges of the government, and we work to figure out what the right number is so we can support our school system. In this particular situation, what I can say to you is to me is sobering, is the fact that the recovery of our school system is going to be part and parcel, or I would say instrumental, in the recovery of the entire community if we're going to get through this COVID-19 pandemic. So obviously the health situation is going to be the biggest issue. Are we going to be able to be safe out in the community? But to think about an economic recovery when parents have to be at home with their kids, to think about education when parents have to be supported in being able to be teachers at home, to be able to figure out how to keep kids following safety parameters at the school site in order to ensure that children don't become the carriers and the spreaders of the coronavirus. All these things are just really new, they're really challenging, and it really requires a lot of cooperation between all branches and all agencies to make sure that we do this right. So my biggest thing is that fear is the biggest issue right now, is that no matter what we do, we're going to always have to overcome this issue of people being scared and fearful and anxious. And so our effort is to be as transparent as we can about the challenges that we face, the issues that we're working through, and then over the next few weeks, as we get towards the finalization of these plans, to be able to make sure that the community is aware and is able to see what we're doing and input into what we're doing, so that we can all reach a point where recovery becomes possible. So even from yesterday to today, in our informational briefing yesterday, today's hearing, and even side stories and conversations, even though we feel like we've got a plan that's starting to come together, you still have to reach out and survey your teachers, like we talked about here, your parents, because it's not just about being safe, it's about having the perception that you're safe, right? So people need to know that their worst fears are being thought about, are being considered. My kid has asthma. Have you thought about my child? Are there alternatives? What if I don't feel like my child should go to school? Are there alternatives? Not because I don't trust you, but because I'm just scared. And so our committee has to struggle with those realities in trying to craft a plan that the public has faith in, so that we can start to think about having that first child step foot onto our school grounds. And so that's the burden, as you know, because you know many of the members of this task force, that's the burden that everyone is shouldering right now to try to get this right. So we appreciate you raising challenges and issues that we should consider, because by no means do we think we know everything. We're gathering that information, trying to shape our thoughts and strategies, and then we hope that together we can come up with a plan that the community can feel confident in.
Thank you, Superintendent. Mr. Chairman, I just have one more question and a closing statement. My next question would be, and forgive me, Madam Chair, if this was asked earlier to my colleague, Senator Nelson. I know she expressed similar concern and for, not speaking for her, but for at-risk students. And my specific question would be to an issue that I had asked my team about. Mr. Superintendent, could you explain for me how special students with special needs, with extreme disabilities, if you will, forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing this, how they are being accommodated, notwithstanding the fact that we're in a COVID self-quarantine situation, but keeping foremost in mind that there are federal monies that have been assigned to provide such services, and I'm just not aware. So could you give us an overview of that, please?
So you sound like you've been in education before, Senator Castro. So no, you're really touching all the difficult points, which is very good because it is something that we're struggling with. So when the country went into shutdown, when all these school districts closed, and the U.S. Department of Education started to issue waivers to allow for food, to allow for modifications to the curriculum and not requiring the yearly assessment and so forth, one of the considerations they had was whether or not to waive the IDEA requirements around services to students with disabilities. So I would just say many leaders in the Education Committee were saying, please just waive that for now so we can try to figure this out because we don't know how to do distance learning and then ensure that we're meeting the IEP requirements for each of these students. So the response from the U.S. Department of Education, to their credit, is let's not do that yet. Let's not take let's not relax those expectations that students with disabilities deserve to be included as part of any effort to serve students. So that's the mandate. How do we meet those needs? And I have to tell you, again, we can talk about assistive technology, we can talk about modifications to the IEPs to reflect what distance learning means to every student, but it's a new world, and this is something that the task force is really working on because we're clear that you're not relieved of those responsibilities. It's now part and parcel. So our special education division, I think distance learning we are gonna have to ramp up the assistive technology component of it. But if you can imagine being in an IEP and trying to rethink what it looks like for your student, your child to receive services in a time frame where you have staggered schedules, and we're not even sure what that'll look like. And a lot of students, as you might also know, depend on that regularity, that routine of going to school. So there's even the disruptive component, there's just so many issues, and I don't think anyone's figured it out yet. But what's good about it is that the feds, in requiring these funds to be spent, have said you have to figure it out. We'll be flexible. Maybe we'll help. We'll try to provide guidance. We'll share what people are doing, but it's not. You don't have a pass. So unfortunately, I can't say I have the answers for that. I would say that it is definitely a challenge that we're going to have to embrace, and it is part of the requirements to use the CARES Act funding. My deputy? Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I guess, and maybe if I could just offer up for your consideration, maybe the portability of funds in the future to assist these families, especially with students who have extreme needs, right? It's a challenge for some families who I know, and I'm sure that if there are federal monies to set aside to provide that type of assistance to them, however way possible, even transporting a child to and from a certain place, this quarantine has literally challenged these families who have students with special needs. And I had parents tell me that because they had been reliant or had the privilege of having that kind of assistance before, and the COVID quarantine has sort of shut that down, that it's extremely difficult even for them to sustain themselves as parents because they can't go from one place to another now because of issues such as transportation.
So Senator, you'll be proud to know that when we did the grab-and-go meals,
yeah,
the team immediately thought of that, and they said, look, we're going to set up these school sites, but what we'd like to do is mobilize the sped buses, get the meals, we do our outreach to our families with students with disabilities, and just bring the meals out to them.
Thank you.
We mobilized those sped buses to do that, and just an example of the fact that these are on the forefront of the team's mind, and so it was an easy thing to say, yes, let's just get those bus drivers out there, load the meals up, and just go house to house to the families that requested it, and make sure that we're not asking them to come out to the school sites just to get a school meal. So,
And on that note, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, Mr. Superintendent, you and your team, and especially the bus drivers and these classified personnel in the school system who give so much of themselves. Thank you to the men and women who show up to school, especially the grab and go programs that you folks have, despite the imminent threat to their health. And so I thank your deputy, your principals, your school aides, all those who've come out. I've seen them at Carbolito, at Canyon Heights Elementary, Agate Elementary, and so forth. And I thank you. Thanks to your leadership, we're doing the best we can. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Senator Will. Senator Mary Torres, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many of the thoughts that I had were answered by you, Mr. Fernandez. The one thing that impressed me the most is how there are just so many variables right now that we're playing with distant learning, and what the condition is of whether we're going to be able to open schools, whether we're going to have a population of 50% at the schools, another 50% doing distant learning. But as you talk about all the federal funds coming in, one thing that seems to be a scenario now is with your planning can also come perhaps planning on how to utilize savings from travel dollars, from less supplies used, utility costs, maintenance,
Right.
the like, which I'm sure will factor and help a little bit. But the other thing that I'd like to advocate for as you plan for all these new normal scenarios is how to allow or enable a child to go back to school or to participate in school. Not only access to technology, if that's one scenario, which you talked about a little bit in the oversight, but also the cost of going back to school. And I say that with the reality that right now, just with your food distribution, it is astounding to me and heart-wrenching how many people are lining up for free food right now. And with that in mind, I can't imagine that those same families will incur the cost of mandatory uniforms at the prices that they're being offered, and all other things associated with equipping themselves to go back to school. So, in the back of my mind, and perhaps it's for another venue or other organizations, or perhaps your board, but I think that with your other considerations of how to make school operate in a not normal time, how to also accommodate children in a very severely austere time for their families, because I imagine that most of these children are the children that are lining up or accessing that free lunch and breakfast programs that you provide, and their parents are most likely the ones that are lining up for free food. It breaks my heart, and I just don't know how these families are going to get through it. So if we could at least ease some things like those. And I know this is controversial because there's businesses that are providing these, and there's certain percentages of the money that goes back to the school, but it's really on the backs of these kids and these families. So I just wanted to lend that, and thank you very much for your thoroughness and for being so open to concerns that we have. And if there's some way that I can help carry that further to help our children get back to school or have access to learning, I'd more than be willing to do that.
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate that. I think we're having the same reaction that you are. Even as we plan, I don't think we've considered everything yet, so I appreciate that suggestion that we really look very carefully at the barriers to returning to school. I mean, some of them are going to be the mental health barriers. How do we make sure that kids feel safe? Some of them are going to be logistical, just managing through the social distancing. But what you're adding in terms of basic costs that the families might incur during this time is concerning. Earlier today, I had to send a message to somebody to kind of, they were really complaining about what would happen today down at the PD warehouse because there was such a huge line of traffic in both directions. And I had to say in response that, we run this commodities program throughout the year. It's not a new program, it just hasn't been, we haven't been in the same time, in the same time period of need. So we don't normally run into this type of traffic. But if you're telling me that we're seeing this traffic out there, I wouldn't focus so much on the fact that DOE wasn't prepared for it, but more on the fact that there is a really deep need for food support in this community, and we had only one site. So I did call the Lieutenant Governor up and ask, can we think about 2 sites, north and central and elsewhere? I said, we can get the commodities, but we need manpower and we need, areas for containers and so forth. But if we can do that, then maybe we can meet the needs because it's really deep. And so that just reflects the likelihood that there are other needs that we're going to see facing our families when it's time to start school again. And so we appreciate that, and that's something that I'm sure we'll factor in to the recommendations of the task force.
Thank you, and I'm sure that as you develop your protocols for how to deal with learning or the school situation and setup, that the budget will also reflect all of that. And I think that whatever savings can be realized by the reduced presence at the school, the physical attendance of school, perhaps can be applied to other areas, and the savings applied to other needs. But I just wanted to make that comment because I think that if a kid has a hard time getting to school because they can't afford a shirt and a pair of shorts that they're mandated to wear, then we really need to get smart about how to just lax certain things for the sake of being practical.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mary Torres. Senator Kelly, and you'll be followed by Senator Luis Munoz.
Hafide, good to see you. It was just the other night we were all in Zoom together.
Right.
So good to see you in person, actually. And it's been a very productive discussion. Both that time that we were at an informational briefing, we learned a whole lot about the hard work that GDOE is doing, the many challenges, and as we've been discussing here this afternoon, it just really drives home the level of challenges. I mean, all of that typical closeness and so forth, it's just seems to me, at least at this point, one of our biggest challenges on the island is how to make that all work. So definitely I appreciate all of the task forces that have been put together and all the thinking and researching that they're doing to try to come up with a variety of alternate systems that may work. And it was important to have that discussion about a possible second wave. We all know that it's a real possibility, and we really don't know what it's going to mean for the entire school year, or at some period in the school year. So, my first question, I mean, it will still be about playgrounds, but the more that we've had this discussion, I've really come to think about, well, I'm not even sure how to think about a playground in COVID-19 conditions. But I'm sure that people have been thinking about it. The kids need to get out there. They need that release of energy. They need to exercise and all of those things. So, but we're not necessarily here to hear all the details because it's a budget consideration. So with the playgrounds and the budgetary considerations, you had mentioned them as part of that $90 million of capital improvement projects, and you were saying that across the board, all of the schools need a replacement for their playgrounds. Fortunately, perhaps there will be funding for the Head Start students because their requirements and their funding are different. But just so that I can understand it and we can all be thinking about it, do you have any understanding per school or just in general how much of that $90 million the playgrounds are of that cost?
So to be honest, the $90 million really reflected the cost of the main facilities. Didn't even take into account the revitalization of playgrounds. Now, we do have a 1.5 million, I believe, set aside for playgrounds. It was approved several years ago, but it had to go through the environmental process, and we're only now, I think, being able to see whether that can be released. But the challenge now is, what do playgrounds look like with social distancing? I mean, that's something, and again, I mean, our task force, I'm sure, is taking notes saying, we didn't even think about this, but playgrounds are going to be important. I mean, not just for the, it's for the mental health side of helping kids go back to a routine and enjoy being around friends. I was kind of smiling behind my mask when you started about this, because right before I came to the hearing, my 12-year-old, who is one of the students who would return back to school under any condition, he said, "Dad, I heard about these staggered schedules." He goes, "Don't you do it." He goes, "Don't you prevent me from meeting my friends." So I'm thinking about, I don't know if I even thought about that, but there are going to be adjustments that kids have to make at the younger ages. Mine's a middle schooler. He's saying, if you give me a schedule, I'm not going to see my friends. I'm not going to be happy. And, there's things like that where the kids and their groups of friends that take care of each other at the school site, you're going to be altering that. And that does have an impact on how kids, feel and progress at school too, especially at middle school. So, thank you for raising that issue. I think what's going to have to be thought through, I mean, it's similar to sports, right? When can we start the sports seasons up again? I don't know. We have a lot of people talking about contingencies and scenarios, but you're going to have to do it under the circumstances that we have today. So if social distancing is required, it's going to have an impact on playgrounds and on sports and similar types of activities. So again, just something else. Thank you for raising it. And I think my team says there is a handbook for playgrounds under social distancing. So we're going to have to read and learn and see what that means for our playgrounds.
Well, and that's very good to hear that there's a handbook. This is happening nationally and globally. So in some sense, as terrible as it all is, it maybe means that across the globe, we're having to contend with some very similar issues and are maybe able to help each other out. And I will be very interested to see, because sports and playground time, recess time, they are so important. I would be very interested in seeing what this means. The only thing I can picture in my mind is kind of this joke where they were saying that it's the new benches, like school benches, and there was 2 seats like 6 feet apart and nothing in between. But it will be something better than that, obviously. So as I mentioned, I'll be very interested in seeing how this develops, because I'm sure that they will be able to come up with some really innovative solutions. And overall, farther down the road, we really do want to keep on playgrounds. So this may not be the time to talk about it in the bigger picture, but have you explored working with recycled materials at all? Not for the entire playground, but maybe for portions of it? Has anybody on a task force or so forth been part of those discussions?
I haven't heard that come up yet as part of those discussions, but
okay.
Well, we're so noted.
And so one of the other things that was going through my mind, and Senator Will covered it pretty thoroughly, but as he was talking about teachers perhaps maybe not coming back, and I was thinking about that there may be quite a few that have put in enough years that they're close to retirement, or they are eligible to retire. And with health concerns and maybe even the technology concerns, which he also mentioned, again, it's just helping me understand some of the many challenges that you're going through.
Senator, if I could.
Are there a high number of teachers that are close to retirement that might be a concern for you?
Yeah, like I said, there's about 400 who are of employees, most of them teachers, who are between 25 to 30 years. So we can see them close to the 30-year mark. who have surpassed 25 years already, and so definitely can retire. Um, you know, like you said, I mean, there are multiple variables and multiple issues and details that are going to be worked out. And like you said, we're very confident that they will be worked out and will be addressed. And then and there won't be a shortage of them that develop, I'm sure, as we go through the course of the year. I think the core competency of our organization at this point has to be adaptability. You know, in this during this time, because we have to be aware that this is going to be an uncertain situation, uncertain year, many uncertainties that we have to be flexible in dealing with. So that's the type of organization we're going to have to be to get through these challenges. But as you raise these issues, they are raising really big questions, right? They're not just, some of these are recovery questions, how do we kind of get back to some version of normal? But what happens if you end up with a massive shortage of teachers who want to go in the classroom while you're ramping up distance learning? It's going to force us to lean even more heavily on distance learning. Can we have a teacher on delivering a virtual lesson to multiple classrooms in multiple schools? Are we going to have to take that route because we aren't able to fill those positions? Those are the kinds of thoughts that we're going to have to factor into the scenarios. So, but as you can tell, that's a bit further than we had thought, because right now our philosophy is that we don't believe distance learning replaces your traditional in-class instruction. We think it's supposed to supplement it, and then in cases like this, be able to be an adequate substitute for a short time period. But the times are changing, and we may need to consider all options as we work our way through this situation.
Those are very good points about distance learning. And, I've taught online classes at the university, but definitely when we're talking about younger students, I think that face-to-face interaction and for a variety of reasons is really important. So I can see how it makes much more sense to be supplemental if possible, and only more than that if the health conditions begin to necessitate.
Right, absolutely. And of course, when you think about distance learning, we think about older students. We think about university students who take online courses, and maybe high school students. But when you start thinking about kindergarteners and elementary school students, and thinking about what does it mean to social distance and do online learning, I mean, we're talking about a whole new world of issues. If you want to tell some kindergartners how to not touch each other and how to stay 6 feet apart, you can imagine what our kindergarten teachers are going to have to struggle with. So at every level, there are different things that are going to have to be considered. So, that's just the world we live in. But like I said, and I hope you do have the confidence that, in the department, we do have a good team together of people who are committed to children and who know that we have to get teaching and learning back on its feet, and we need to do it in this environment no matter what. I think it's symbolic, and if not, I think it's critical to the recovery of the community. But when you've gone through a typhoon or other kind of disaster, our efforts has been to get schools open because we can provide services to these children and these families, and it's a symbol that we can return back to normal. Even after a disaster. So it really is a lot riding on the recovery of our school system, and so I know the team's up to it.
Yes, as I mentioned before, I'm extremely, extremely appreciative for all of the hard work they're doing in trying to figure this out. So I guess I'll just skip to my last question, and I remember earlier we had passed a bill to make looking at solar energy more of hopefully a reality for GDOE, because there are all of these additional logistics that you're having to consider. Do you think that is going to be impacted? Do you think you'll be able to still make some progress on that this year?
Yes, I was looking up, just to refresh my memory, looking up the legislation. I know that we had gone through and asked for it, and then it got passed. And I believe it was passed in the last session before we went into shutdown. So we haven't had a chance to pick that up and run with it, but that's something we'll hope to do as we get back to more normal operations, now. I mean, as you can, the thrust of that bill was procurement. And of course, from a procurement standpoint, we've been trying to make sure that we operate within all of, on other projects and all of, operate within our procurement laws, even given this shutdown and the pandemic and all these other requirements. So we haven't turned our attention to solar, but we are moving our procurement process along for other projects, which means that we'll soon get to the solar bill and figure out how to proceed. But I was looking it up and I go, that was right before we shut down. That's why we hadn't, I haven't heard from my staff kind of working on it yet because their attention is on other things. But we do plan to take that up when we get back to some level of resumed operations.
Right, and it's understandable, you're juggling a lot right now, so, but, hopefully in the big picture there will be progress because the intention is, of course, to help save millions of dollars that are being spent in utilities. And then just the last quick thing, so of course we want the money to be used in all the legal and appropriate ways, but with the CARES Act money and the HEROES Act money that I'm now a big fan of. I want it to come our way and help our educational system out. Because this is a health issue, is there any possibility of it being applied to things, maybe more so the HEROES funding, but towards those canopy replacements, restroom repairs, drainage issues, some of those kind of repairs, because the lack of canopies or suitable canopies cannot be helping in a situation that's going to further challenge people's health.
Right. At this point, I don't believe, obviously we're looking and trying to figure out what is allowable and as we finalize our application, but I would suggest that the flexibility in the CARES Act would allow us to do things like be able to outfit and support cafeterias now becoming learning spaces. So we need to address a cafeteria because now it's going to become 2 classrooms that enable social distancing. That might be something that is now become something that we can discuss with you as GDOE versus before where they say, well, it has nothing to do with your classroom instruction. So because I think the thought is we have to start looking at bigger spaces within our schools to conduct teaching and learning. So there may be areas around the edge that we will be able to test. I think the issue with canopies might be able to be addressed if some of the available budget that we were supposed to use is shifted. There's room for it now because something else is being paid for by another source of funds. If the HEROES Act goes through, I believe there's a lot more flexibility and maybe that will be a solution for those types of projects. I think ultimately, as I mentioned before in prior hearings, capital projects are usually funded through long-term financing, which means government has typically borrowed at favorable rates to support those investments. But because of our government's borrowing capacity, we're not at a stage where we're able to do that. So every project becomes a pay-as-you-go project, which becomes real prohibitive in being able to fund those kinds of projects. So I really think the solution is that dedicated funding stream. I know it's harder in this environment. Otherwise, we're going to have to work with what we have. And luckily, we still have the DOI funds. So on that list, there are some canopies that will be able to be replaced. But again, those funds are limited and are not promised continually. So we'll make use of those funds to try to address those canopy projects.
So Usmasi, again, for all of that thoughtfulness. And part of why I had started with the playgrounds is, in getting community stakeholdership, those perhaps people can gravitate towards the most. And so, I don't know if there's any ability to get the community involved as well. But thank you all, everybody at GDOE who is really working so diligently on the daily to get food out and having been creative to provide that for our families. We have such a high level of families that need that kind of extra support. and especially during this time, and all the thinking that you've been putting towards trying to move forward for the community. So Sejus Masi and Sejus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Luis, do you have any questions, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't worry, I'll stay until the very last question is answered. Thank you again, Superintendent, for being here, and Zenny, thank you so much. One of our colleagues talked earlier about graduations, and I feel terrible for all of the graduates, most especially the seniors, because they didn't know that their last day of school before the shutdown was the last time they were going to see any of their classmates, and I feel terrible for them. But I think what it has done was allowed the schools and the families to be more innovative and how to really focus in on their child. And I've seen some things, and this is not really a question, but more like an awareness. On social media, they have this great thing now called Adopt a Graduate. And if some of our colleagues haven't seen it yet, please, I encourage them and the public to go and take a look at it. And Adopt a Grad is what it is, and it'll just allow the community to help them feel very special, whether it be in their own family setting or just to contribute to making them feel special. So if the public and my colleagues would check that out, it would be a great opportunity. I just adopted a grad yesterday, and I look forward to helping the family make that graduate feel special. Mr. Fernandez, well, how many nurses do you have in the school system now?
I think we have about 44.
44? And you said that could also jeopardize like any outbreaks or incidences like this pandemic could really jeopardize moving
Right.
forward. Is 44 an adequate number, or is there like an ideal number for the school system?
I believe in our request, we're requesting for additional LPNs to support some of the larger schools. But actually, I would say that we're really lucky to have the number that we do have. When I came on board, we had a number of vacancies. It was very hard to recruit. But through the hard work of our nursing supervisor and our staff, we've been able to fill most positions. And that's been very good for our school system to have them there. And they're the reason why we have those partners out in the community who have been open to having more school-based health services because there's somebody at the campus. So probably the larger schools, we would appreciate more help, and that's been what the nurses are requesting. But for the most part, we do want to maintain and ensure that we continue to have our positions filled at the schools. At every school.
In some of my discussions with some of the nurses, they are overworked, and they're constantly trying to balance, the health of not just the students but also the faculty there as well. You jumped on a very recent public hearing. Thank you again for that. About ideally performing physicals and maybe TB tests for entrance into school. Was there anything in the plans to outsource that as like maybe private clinics to come in as what they are doing now, or was there maybe somewhere in the future sites of creating a clinic there, or how was there a plan for that?
So I wouldn't say there was a plan for it. I think the concept was if we wanted to explore school-based health services, that we might try to identify maybe 3 schools in the north, central, and south that might be good candidates in meeting a pocket of need in the community, and it would only be on a pilot basis to determine whether it to see that it worked. I think alongside it, though, you would have to address a lot of issues, and funding being one of them. So I guess one of the opportunities that we wanted, that I've talked to the Lieutenant Governor about, to put it in their minds. But if we're successful as an island in increasing and maintaining a higher Medicaid reimbursement rate, I believe that not only will that support the needs of our current healthcare entities, but provide some additional resources that might be available to DOE and school-based health clinics meaning that you could deliver services there, but be able to benefit from federal reimbursement in order to sustain and support having that kind of program in that kind of setting. I mean, it would require, obviously setting aside room and ensuring that we have probably a supervising doctor for the program, and it could involve outsourcing. It's just a matter of really getting together. And first, I think the first step would be to somehow get into the Medicaid state plan as an allowable activity, and then that would enable us.
Is it currently not an allowable activity?
I don't believe. I think for us, the key would to be Medicaid eligible services. So I don't believe it's in the Medicaid plan and something that we would want to pursue, and at least to be able to pilot, one or two programs and then see how that works.
Is the school-located vaccines program costing GDOE anything now at this point? What's currently going on?
I'd have to go back and get those numbers. I know we work closely with public health
Okay.
for vaccines and to be able to provide services, but I'd have to go back and get those numbers.
So if it were outsourced, like say for example a private clinic, whether it be American Medical Clinic or SDA or FHP, if they were to come in and perform these procedures, like maybe a physical or even TB tests, could they bill the students' health insurance and Medicaid and MIP directly without having to create a clinic at DOE?
I would say that, this is further down than what we've, actually thought through, but I would say from the start that it would be beneficial to bring in an experienced and administrative services unit to do Medicaid reimbursements, because we understand all the documentation and everything that's needed to successfully, get the reimbursement. So I could see it being an outsourced operation on the administrative side, including, the service delivery side. So that's certainly something we've talked about, whether that's something that we would need to build capacity around or outsource.
I think it's great to look into it because it is breaking down the barriers of having these parents who, some of them who really do qualify for Medicaid and MIP, don't even have the means to take their child to a community clinic or outsourced outreach clinic. So I think that would be a great opportunity for you to look into that, and however way it would not cost GDOE anything more if it were to consider outsourcing like private clinics.
Right. I think that something like that would definitely benefit from partnership. This is not something that DOE had said, and I have said, oh, wow, we want to run a clinic and do it on our own. And I just think that we believe that we have our students at the school site, and parents come to the school site, and we know that our kids may not be able to access healthcare or preventative healthcare for sure. And so if there's any way that we could meet that need, with the partnership of the necessary, parties, the medical and administrative side of it, I think it's worth discussing as a community partnership. It really isn't in our core mission, but it's very closely related. So I would be very open to people saying, hey, why don't we start pilot a clinic and be willing to support it.
Health, safety, and education for the child, right? That's the most important. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Zenny, for being here. And again, thank you for the continuing hearing. Hopefully we don't have to do another one again before the budget session. And I would imagine that you would much rather be somewhere else doing something else rather than sitting here in front of us trying to fight for money. But thank you again, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Luis. No, there won't be any more hearing for DOE. There may be collaboration, but no more hearing. Senator Jim Moylan, you said you only have one question. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're my favorite. Thank you, Superintendent. So you started off really positive that you are receiving your allotments. That's good. And then you also mentioned the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, which seems to be coming on in. Recently, senators have received the February report and then the April report. And so for that Territorial Education Facilities Fund on the February report, it shows a shortfall of $1.522946 million. So, maybe still workable, but maybe something we should consider. Then in April, we received we had the next report, which brings us up to April. And so that moved up to $5,300,000. So it's the brackets in the red. So that's one source of revenue for GDOE, but also another, of course, is the general fund that's given to you. We know there's going to be great losses in the general fund because of the BBT and the employees' income tax, which are the biggest money makers for the government of Guam. So that's going to impact us greatly. In your report that you provided to us, item number 6 on page 3, you discussed the base of the 14 points under the Adequate Education Act, and that we're not making those goals because of insufficient funding. That's pretty honest, and it's pretty. I'm glad we understand that. But the one concern I have is that this, if we're not able to fulfill this, GDOE is not able to fulfill this, you're looking at a possible trigger a lawsuit. And that's the last thing we want to happen because it's a mandate. And you're mentioning that the biggest challenges for the department is maintaining its facilities, which for sure you said that's safety first. But then you also mentioned it's providing the textbooks for every student. And I think in another report I reviewed that the CARES Act is assisting in that process. There's some money available for that. But as you mentioned, we're looking at your recovery effort or your Plan B. So I'm just wondering if that recovery effort, if we as your senator bodies here who created that 14-point law, do you want us to consider, or is it something in your Plan B that we should be looking at maybe waiving something there or suspending something there to help support your efforts and your recovery plans?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. The answer is no. And the reason I say that is that if you actually look at the Adequate Education Act, it basically sets out what I believe should be goals of the school system. Now, does it make it difficult because it potentially triggers legal action for failure to meet it? I've communicated, with the legislature, as you or your prior colleagues, that's what the law says. And but I think the requirements to have a certified teacher in every class and so forth, and we all have your air conditioning in classroom, all those things that have contributed to the health and safety of our students, based on the language itself, doesn't. I don't know that we would need to change those terms. I think the issue is clarifying how the funds are being utilized to support those 14 points. And like I said, the biggest issue, which I feel is solvable, it's ultimately solvable, is finding either there is an opportunity to secure long-term financing through government bonds, as would be a typical mechanism for capital improvements, to fund facilities, or to dedicate a stream of funding that's available to support those. I think there are solutions there. It's just that we haven't jumped on and embraced and figured that part out, because I think over the past 3 years we keep running into we've been running into some of the financial challenges with the tax cuts and other things that we've been prioritizing. But in better days, or I think the solution is to just commit. And like I mentioned, if we set aside $1 million, $1.5 million, but you're able to leverage that over a longer period of time, because people know that that's a committed stream of funding for 5 years, for 10 years, for longer, you can immediately leverage that to take care of some of your more expensive renovations and projects that are typically left unaddressed because we never have that large amount of funding. So when people say Band-Aids and we're Band-Aiding, the issues, it's because we're finding cheap ways to address the issue. But if it's a cheap way, the next year it might come back, or the 2 years from now it might come back, because we weren't able to really make the investment to make it a permanent fix. So I don't think it's unsolvable. It's just one of those things where We have to get the government to a better place. Or to identify those opportunities that may come up should there be expiring bonds or other things that would allow us to free some money up for educational purposes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I was just joking, Senator Moylan, about the one question. But thank you. Senator Tello, ma'am, Minority Leader.
I know you just want to keep me here, Mr. Chair, to keep you company, so keeping me last, right? Hi, Zenny. I wanted to say hello to you when we had the information briefing on Zoom the other day. You were there, but I saw some of your texts, so I want you to know I do appreciate everything you're doing and those some of those answers you gave on those texts. It was very helpful. I appreciate that so much. And John,
Can I also take a moment? I do want to also recognize her as well. This is her first budget hearing with us, so I just, I said, I'm going to shield you. Let me see if I can take all these questions and let you go through the first, but after this, you're a veteran of the hearing, so now you can, stand on your own now. But I did want to welcome her. Thank you, Senator Tadigui, for recognizing her. I think she started with us late January, and last week of January, and before long, we shut down and went into COVID pandemic, and it's been an experience that probably she wasn't expecting for the first few months, especially in an agency this large and complicated. So she's here for a bunch. So I said, look, let me take the questions as much as possible.
oh, hold on, Zen. Let me make sure they turn on your mic because I'd like to hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Know that he kept me busy while working at home, so
Yeah.
I've earned my keep.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely, and I tell you, for the superintendent to bring you along when he's only allowed one person says a lot about you, Zenny. So I'm my hat's off to you, and I hope that we continue a great collaboration because I really love your disposition. You're such a good person, and so I probably won't be long. Everybody's asked all these questions I had in mind, but there is let me go back to when we had that informational briefing. I asked you the question of, and I think Senator Moylan touched on it, how much of the, if you had to pay out the double pay, and that you estimated,
Yes.
and you came up with $2 to $3 million, and that's such a wide gap.
I'm glad to be able to
Yeah.
clarify it if possible, because I was kind of guesstimating based on the
Yeah.
numbers I'd seen. But it looks, based on the latest numbers, and Dr. Zenny actually was doing the estimates, it looks that for every month it's about $1.5 million. So when I said $3 million, it was an estimate of the total cost. But for every month it's about $1.5 million, and so you can extrapolate from that
Okay.
in terms of as we go through pay periods, an additional,
Okay.
$750,000 is what we're looking at. If the double pay were to be paid out above what we're already paying, which is their base and the differential.
Okay,
So that's the difference that we're talking about.
Thank you for that. The other question I had is, and there was a concern, earlier we had a public hearing or a budget hearing with the Attorney General's office, and the question was asked about the limited gaming or the gaming fund. And I know that you received $558,000 and $692 from the limited gaming. Do you have something, a project, or do you utilize that money for anything in particular, or does it just get all in the one pot and disseminated where you see fit? Or do you have something particular for that money? Because, there was a ruling, and I have a funny feeling that pot is not going to be there anymore. And I
Right.
believe the Attorney General said something about there was decisions made and orders made to that effect, and something that affecting in July. So,
Well, I'll have to look more closely at that and maybe look at the hearing that you had. I didn't catch that. With limited gaming, it is reserved for either sports facilities or equipment and so forth. And we, of course, have been collecting those funds, and in the past have used them to help with gym repairs and other types of projects. in this particular situation, I have to go confirm it because I wasn't prepared with that detail, but I know that with the limited gaming, we were hoping to do a project at the Southern High School fields in partnership with the administration, whom I also know have funds for recreational purposes. So we had started discussions about possibly pooling those funds to do more of a community-based athletic facility. But again, like you're saying, if there are changes and that stream of funding is no longer going to be available at a certain time, then we need to make our adjustments. But I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, you
to
can
be
look
clear.
at the opinions by the judges or the decisions and orders that
Right.
were rendered, and yeah, it might be of interest of you to keep on tab on that one. My last question is, who will oversee, will you have the third-party fiduciary that you have currently right now overseeing the $41 million? Will they oversee the spending of that to ensure that it's followed on the guidelines?
Yeah, so I mean, as long as we're under special conditions, the third party is the fiduciary. So right before we were informed that we would be getting these funds, we did have a call with risk management they wanted to clarify that because the special conditions have not yet changed, the third party fiduciary would still be involved with the management of those funds.
Okay, you know what, I did see another star here, sorry. Just on the capital improvements, you know, the restrooms, the canopies, you know, Superintendent, I'm seeing the one that you submitted to us here with the budget, and you're talking about point 12, and it talks about all the capital improvements, and it comes out to $23 million, and then and what you provided us today, though, it's showing on the first question was 90 million that you had estimated on, and that was like 2013, Guam DOE was
Right.
documented. Okay, so that was far back, and we all know that, you know, prices have changed since, inflation, et cetera, and that 90 million probably have grown. But then you have these list of projects here, which are showing similar to this here as well. So when we're reviewing this,
Let me clarify which document are you looking at first?
well,
The-
let's go with the one that you submitted and then
okay.
jive it with this one, okay?
Okay, I'm not sure which documents those are other than my response for today, but
Okay.
what I can say is, so when we reference the $90 million, that is a point in time, as you mentioned, and over time we've been able to address portions of that $90 million, but of course, as every year goes by, there's, right, I mean, it ebbs and flows, the deferred maintenance, if you're unable to sufficiently address in a timely manner all the maintenance needs. So it may not be $90 million, but we put it out there just because it fluctuates, and we know there's a significant amount that's still out there. And it was just one point in time where we were able to document that. So the projects that you have on the list that I sent you in response were the major projects that we're working on today. We just happened to line up these projects with federal funds that are coming in, but there are additional requests and additional needs in other schools that are still unaddressed. And are the components making up the $23 million request that's in the budget.
Okay.
So again, like I guess the picture is we do get federal funds from DOI, and we're lucky that we are because we're able to dedicate those to certain projects, the bigger projects. But there's still a long list of other projects that still need to be addressed, and you know, that's the problem we're trying to solve. So DOI is committed, I believe, $1 million on an annual basis for 5 years. I think they extended it to a 6-year, but again, it's not something that we can count on, you know, for years beyond that. So when that goes away, then we'll be looking for another source of funding, or probably go back to you as DOI and renew our requests.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
Well, thank
absolutely.
you. Thank you again so much for all you're doing. And again, I can't express my gratitude that what DOE is doing to assist the people, especially with the food drive and all the meals that are going out there every
Yes,
day.
thank you, Senator.
It just makes me proud, you know, proud of our DOE agency and the people that work there. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Senator. We'll pass that along.
Thank you, Senator Tello. And I'd like to thank my colleagues for sticking around. Awesome. Mr. Fernandez, thank you. And you know, I also again extend my thank you to the staff, all your folks. I know they're all hard charging and underpaid. Okay, I say that because I know a lot of them do a lot of work. And if you can, please provide me the information on the double pay that was asked. Separate and maybe remove the differential and just indicate what the double pay would be.
So we're going to, in that amount, we would remove the base pay and the differential that we already would have paid, and you're talking about the remaining amount.
Yeah,
right?
just tell us basically if you got double pay. The reason why, because we have 4 different bills out there,
Okay,
and at the end of the day, whichever one prevails, you would at least have a number you can use.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And that being said, I know that you're going to be in communication with your oversight chair.
Yes.
Please, whatever comes up, please, if you can, provide me a copy. And then,
Absolutely.
okay, so we can be in good communication. That being said, this committee will conclude this budget hearing for the Department of Education. We'll continue to receive testimonies. Please address your written testimony to the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing, and submit it via email to Senator Joe S. Augustine at gmail.com. Si Jews Marcy for your attendance and participating in today's hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. This budget hearing for Bill 282-35LS relative to the Guam Department of Education is now adjourned at 4:05 p.m. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez and Ms. Zenny. Have a nice day.